This is my second video in the series of the early Beatles. I would like to shortly come up with some comments to the first video. Well, the question that might have puzzled some is that they might have heard that John Lennon was very much against jazz, and I was saying a lot about jazz in the first video. And it's true, he was, and I was, but what I was talking about was that Skiffle became a thing of its own. It came from the revival movement, but sort of settled its own and were mixed up with, that I guess means something else, blended with all kinds of other stuff. The Quarrymen at a very early point included rock and roll tunes in their repertoire. And they were actually playing a gig at the Cavern long before, the famous Cavern era. It was while it was a jazz club at that time, and they were almost pushed down the stage for playing rock and roll tunes. Because I didn't mention that in the first video, the Cavern started as a jazz club. It was actually a concept directly copied, or you could say stolen, from a French jazz club. One of the guys that started it all up were in French and saw a place called Les Caveaux. I don't know if that pronounced right. My English may be lousy, but I don't speak one word French. So, but the same word in French as the Cavern. And it was like that, going down to a cellar and a quite little place and playing music there. And he said, oh, that's cool. So he found a place in Liverpool. It was actually an old storeroom for vegetables. And the story goes that even after it has been a music club for several years, there was still an odor of old vegetables. So, yeah, in the Quarrymen days, they actually played a gig at the Cavern. It was still a jazz club, and it was not a thing anyone liked at that point that they were playing rock and roll tunes. As I said, Skiffle became a thing of its own, and folk music, well, a bit of rock and roll, a bit of country and western, all sorts of things. And I guess what made it so English is that they incorporated some of those things, about English singing in the pop thing, all that, and someone sits at the piano and they are standing there with their beers and singing something, something that could give you an idea of that thing. Mother's Lament with the cream from Disraeli Gears. There you sort of got it. And Yardbirds made that very similar, I Remember the Night. So that kind of English pop singing, and incorporated all that atmosphere of jolly, cozy, visiting the neighbor and sitting down in the kitchen, and now let's have a nice cup of tea. All that stuff was sort of incorporated to it. So even though it was so deeply rooted in American music, it got this very British twist. But what I was trying most of all to say in my first video is this was the point where all those youngsters found out that they could actually play music themselves. They discovered that it was not that there were some other kinds of people, some special kinds that were these musicians, and oh, I can never do that. Suddenly they discovered it's possible for me to play music. And that was what I was trying to say. And this little sum up kind of leads to what I would try to talk about in this video, because I was kind of saying, oh, some people may have thought about what about that and what about that. And it's very possible that someone watching have some specific questions, or there are some sub-subject they are interested in, and not the whole thing. And maybe some people just want to study it on their own, and they're saying, why do I have to sit and look at a whole bunch of videos with a guy that can't speak proper English, and such thing, and saying, well, it must be possible for me to make my own studies at this thing. So in this video I will talk a bit about different books, and albums, vinyls and CDs and such stuff, and other sources if you want to study the subject of your own. And also for those of you who may have some very specific questions and might just sit and wait while I'm talking about all sorts of other things and saying, well, will he ever come to say something about that thing that I would really like to know something about? You don't have to watch a lot of videos with me. You can find out yourself. And that's what I will say something about in this video. If you want to know a bit more about Skiffle, there are 3 books I can recommend. There's this one, The Skiffle Craze by Mike Dew, with foreword by Chris Barber. And what maybe is a little bit more interested for Beatles fans is this one, just called Skiffle, The Definitive Inside Story, written by Chas McDavid, who was one of the big Skiffle stars. And there are forewords to it, just like Chris Barber read a foreword to my Dew's book. Here are not less than 3 forewords. There's one by Mark Knopfler, the guitarist from the Dire Straits. There's one by Joe Brown, a pop star from the early 60s, very rooted in Skiffle. And here it goes. There's one from George Harrison. Yes, George Harrison. And it's, I wouldn't spoil the surprise, but here it is, Mark Knopfler and George Harrison. They may not think that Joe Brown is famous enough to be mentioned here. They are very good. They are informative and tell the story. Not quite in the same way. They have a bit of a different approach to the subject, but that's a good thing. They kind of supplement, what do we call it? It's a good thing to have them both. The only thing I have to say is that they are written much later, so they are retrospective. that's not a bad thing, but it's just something you got to know. So if you like to know, well, but how was it when it was happening? The zeitgeist, and if you were once something that is actually from the same period that someone was sitting there and writing while it all was happening. There is one. As far as I know, it's the only one there is. Skiffle, the story, a folk song with a jazz beat by Brian Bird and with foreword by Lonnie Donegan. Brian Bird was a village vicar and a big jazz fan, and was very concerned about the youth in his village. And being a jazz fan, when all that skiffle craze began, he thought that was a good idea, and he was backing it up and was actually took part in making a youth club for jazz and skiffle, and they had their own skiffle band and all sorts of things. And by the way he writes, he seems like a that must not happen. He seems to be a quite funny fellow. He doesn't look like that if you look there, but the impression you got from that picture is not similar to the one you get when you're reading the book. I really love this book. I can tell you. I read it over and over and over again. I lost count a long time ago. So, yeah, there are 3 really good books, and in those you can find almost anything you want to know about skiffle. But as great as it can be to know the story and understanding more about things, well, the main thing, of course, is still the music. What is there out there where you can actually hear the music? Oh, there is something. And I will not all of my collection that then it would fill up this whole video, but I will show you some few things you can go for and collect. Well, depending on whether you are mostly collecting vinyl or mostly collecting CDs, there is a bit that makes a bit of a difference. I will mention some CDs here and then go on to some vinyl. As I told in the first video, the kind of forerunner for skiffle was the old jug bands, and besides that, also actually a lot of jazz recordings and recordings by blues musicians in the 20s and 30s using washboard. It was not that uncommon. You can hear it on many records. I will not go into that. As I also said in the first video, you can always dig deeper. And at some point you're ending up with Adam and Eve or the Big Bang or something. So, but if someone really, really would like to know some titles of some good compilations with jug band music and such stuff, please leave a comment in the down below, and I will give you some titles. But here I would stick to the British thing that happened in the 50s. And for many Beatles fans, the important thing to get hand of would, of course, be Bad Penny Blues. with Johnny Parker's piano playing that inspired Paul McCartney for Lady Madonna. Well, there is actually this compilation called Bad Penny Blues with recordings by Humphrey Lyttelton from 55 to 56. They recorded Bad Penny Blues in 56. I said in the first video, oh, give or take 10 years. Well, as you can count out, it was actually 12 years from 56 to 68. That one is not that important. Oh, here's something. A compilation, Crane River Band. I told you about Ken Collier in the first video, the jazz purist that couldn't get it pure enough, and he was in this Crane River Band, and I told you about they were also making things more leaning at blues and folk and such things, and there are some examples here. Actually, the opening song called Muddy Old River, you won't hear any blowing instruments there. It's just guitars, and well, it might be made in the early 50s, but it's sounding like more like an old blues recording from the 30s or something. So this is kind of where it all began. And yeah, you got Ken Collier there, and the clarinet player here, that is Monty Sunshine, who later became a part of the Chris Barber Band. And then we move a little bit on, because here we got a collection from a series called The Vintage, and there I can tell you there are many good things in that series, but this one is particularly interesting. You can see it's Ken Collier, but if you turn it around, you can see here featuring Chris Barber, Monty Sunshine, and Lonnie Donegan. And you can actually see here there are some jazz there are some jazz tunes here, but then you can actually see here there's called the Skiffle set. 4 songs here with a very young Lonnie Donegan singing long before he became the king of skiffle. Well, I got a lot of other things with Ken Collier here. I won't mention those. I will try to really stick to the most important releases and not take just anything with a weak connection. Well, here's one called Lonnie Donegan, King of Skiffle. It's a compilation with all his biggest hits, and you will find them there: Rock Island Line and Putting on a Style, and all his biggest hits, and Nobody's Child, you know, that Beatles recorded with Tony Sheridan, if it was Beatles, and not another group using the name the Beat Brothers. But you can find that it's kind of, oh, okay, you want something, just the hits. Well, this is the one. But there are many of his original albums have been re-released on CD, and there's a whole there's a whole bunch of them here, and you can see there is this series called Lonnie 2000, and they released, well, I got this few, but I guess that's about what there is. I don't know if there's more in the series. But of course there were other acts around. A very important person when it comes to the the British scene of music and how it came into being is this guy Alexis Corner, starting up as a skiffle musician too, but then developed a bit into other things, mostly blues-oriented things, and several members of the Rolling Stones at some point played with him before they became the Rolling Stones. And you know, he's one of those guys. You can say so many famous people sort of traded their child shoes at him. It's a bit like it became with John Mayall later on, with all those great musicians passing through the band, and so he is really a important guy. You know, they called this compilation Cornerstone, and that's quite fair to do. Two compilations with a fine amount of things here. Sorry, I got the wrong one. Well, no, forget about that. Yes, here it is. Something else. This is a very good compilation with the Chas McDavid Skiffle group, containing all their best recordings. And I'm just about to say that this would be my Desert Island Skiffle CD. It's really, really good. At least I think. You can disagree. Well, gotta have the next box here. No, that's there, of course. It's yeah. Yes, this is what I was talking about before. What? No, there is actually just one CD in this series. It's called Skiffle As Good As It Gets, and I think that's fair. It's a double CD, and I guess if you want a collection of the different skiffle groups that were around and just that, and have some examples of how did it sounded and all that stuff, I think this is the one you should go for. And here's a compilation by the Vipers, and I guess if I could bring two skiffle CDs to the Desert Island, this would be the other one. There also is a box set with the complete recordings of the Vipers, and it's really great stuff. I can also recommend that, but of course, buying a whole box set, that's something you do if you are really interested in the subject, not if you just want to get an idea of it and just listen a little bit to it. So it depends on how enthusiastic you are, but I can recommend. I have it somewhere here. I'm not sure where I placed it. Well, doesn't matter. if you are interested, just leave a comment and I go into the details about title and series number and all that stuff. But well, that was CDs. What about vinyl? Well, I could show you a lot of albums. I'm not sure I will do that. I think that may be a little bit waste of time and saying, oh, here's a good one by Lennon again. And so I will say go to second-hand shops of vinyl and look around. And I'm sure you are able to find something, and they may not be that expensive. There's not a very big hype around Skiffle, so it's not something like there are a lot of collectors going, oh, I must have that one, and it really isn't. So I think you can find it for a decent price. Well, okay, now we set the scene for the Skiffle, but here the Beatles enters the story. And what are there to read and to listen to about the very, very earliest days? There are something, and I will show you some few examples here. Hunter Davies, who wrote the first biography about the Beatles back in '68, later on, many years later in fact, wrote this one, The Quarrymen, about the early days, and it's very well researched and it's very informative and well, a good reading, to say it short. You can find somewhere around that people that at some point were in the Quarrymen have recorded some music, and it's kind of traveling backwards. It really is. I am a backwards traveler. Well, it is a little like that, because the first one that came out was this one, and it is with some guys who were in later on, and the music on this CD is, what do you call it, is 60s or oriented pop rock, you could say. It's not very good, to be honest, but kind of interesting. May make it a little bit more interesting is that John Duff Lowe is on it, the one who played piano on that old recording of In Spite of All the Dangers, used in the anthology project. And of course, anthology is a very good source, and there are some of those earliest recordings. Later on, with a different setup, came this one, the Quarrymen, and it's closer to the original setup. There actually is one in between, but I come to this in a moment. I know it's kind of confusing the chronological order, but I have a reason for doing that. This one is from 1994, and this one is from I can't find the year. Well, oh, there. 2004 is this one. But in between those two, here comes the real, the one you simply got to have. The date, the 6th of July, 1957, may ring a bell on many of you. Of course, that was the day John met Paul, where the Quarrymen was playing this gig, and Paul McCartney heard them, and they said hi to each other. Many, many years later, in 97, so it was the day 40 years after that day, they were collected again. Well, not John and Paul, John was dead, and Paul wasn't there, but who was there in Liverpool was those guys that played with John that day. The exact setup, the members of the original Quarrymen, Len Gary, Eric Griffith, Rod Davis, Colin Hanton, and Pete Shotton. Len Gary on guitar, Eric Griffiths on guitar too, Rod Davis also on guitar. In a Skiffle group, it was very common to have lots of guitars. And then Pete Shotton on the washboard and bass, and there was Colin Hanton on drums. Well, a lot of people have been very critical about Pete Best's drumming. But I tell you, when you hear Colin Hanton, well, Pete Best is something like Ginger Baker or Steve Gadd compared to Colin Hanton. But, well, how do I know that? Where have I heard his drum playing? Well, they were having this anniversary, and they actually recorded a CD. Yes, they did. So here it is. That's the one you gotta have. And you can hear how they are playing. I don't know if this gives an honest and exact impression of how they were sounding back then. Most of those guys had not played for many years and were just picking up, and they were out of practice, and so they may have been a little different there. And even if this is the level they were on, they are still got 40 years older. They can't play exactly as they did when they were teenagers. I guess that's quite obvious. Why I'm so critical at Colin Hanton's drumming? Well, I give you the best example there is on this CD. They are playing Bebop-A-Lula. They are starting off. He's playing a, well, quite all right backbeat, 2 and 4. Then they come to the first break. She's the girl in the red blue jeans, and so yes, he stops, and then he have to go on again when they get to Bebop-A-Lula, and he starts banging on 1 and 3, and he is doing that all through the rest of the song. The backbeat disappear, and suddenly it's 1 and 3 all the way. Well, no matter how critical you would be on Pete Best, I think he is able to count to 4, and that he knows the difference between 1 and 2. and is able to play with that in mind. I am not a drummer, but even I could do that. But no matter how bad it is from a technical point of view, I kind of like it. You know, there is this kind of honesty about something pure, something real deal, genuine, whatever you might call it about it. It's guys having fun and just playing for the joy of music, and it's not about how good you are, and there's no showing off. It's just we are having a good times, and we are playing some songs we like, and that's about it. And you know, it's kind of so honest and so real and genuine, and well, it touches my old Skiffle heart. I can't help it. And if you want some good reading to go with this CD, the one you gotta have is this wonderful book, The Day John Met Paul by Jim O'Donnell. It's fantastic. He reconstructed the whole day, and he went deeply into research, even studying old meteorological reports, and when was the sun shining, and when was there a bit of rain, and he does such a good job. I cried. I literally cried while I was reading this. You know, the tears were running down, and I was, oh, it's so good. It's so good. And it really is. It's really a fantastic thing. Another one I'm a little more critic about is this one, Before They Were Beatles, written by Alan Porter. And the reason I'm a little bit more critic is I'm not sure everything here is exact, and yeah, it seems that he got most of the facts right, but some things I'm a little uncertain about. You know, later on, you all heard about that audition where they were searching for a backing group for Billy Fury. You know, this was the manager Laurie Palmer, and he was renaming all his stars, and they all have to have such names. Billy Fury, Marty Wilde, Georgie Fame, and the Beatles ended up with playing backing on a lousy tour to Scotland for a guy called Johnny Gentle. There is it in the anthology, there is this snip of an interview with Paul McCartney where he said that compared to Wilde and Fury, Gentle sounded a little lame. There's one thing about that audition. Oh, I'm not sure. You know, when you're reading so many books about the same subject, sometimes you don't recall what was in what book, but I think it's here. And I think it's actually the only source that stated that. And that's why I think, okay, is this a good story, or is it actually true? But the story goes that at the audition, John Lennon came up to Billy Fury and asked for his autograph. So the story goes. And you know, this is also an important thing to mention. Billy Fury was from Liverpool. So even if he was playing in another style than what you know as Mercy Beat, you could say he was some kind of very early Mercy Beat. Well, if that's how you want to look at it, and saying, okay, artists from Liverpool. I may say a little bit more about that later. But just remember this, and as I said, I would say a little bit more later. Well, that's about the books and the most obvious CDs. Of course, I guess you all know, you must do, you know, this wonderful film, movie, whatever you want to call it, Nowhere Boy. I saw it in the cinema theater and I couldn't wait for the DVD to come. It's such a fantastic film. It's not historical correct in but when you look at it, you just don't care. You know, I saw it with a good friend of mine that is also a big Beatles enthusiast, and well, we could have sitting down and made a list and said, oh, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. Before we have watched 2 minutes, maybe the first minute actually of the film, we forgot all about that and we were simply experiencing. And it was so fantastic sitting there, and so fantastic because, you know, it's kind of all those exact facts and, oh, that's bending it a bit. Oh, now they're bending it a bit. You know, that's on a very rational, intellectual level. But that film sort of touches you so much and goes so deep down in your feelings and, you know, touching you on an emotional level. And you know, it's really like you are living with John Lennon in Liverpool in the late 50s. So it doesn't really matter. It is so fantastic. You really got that feeling that you are living with John Lennon in the late 50s in Liverpool, and you are together with him and going through all those things with him, and it's so fantastic. It's really, and you are so touched, and you are laughing, you are crying, you are, even though there's a lot of bending the facts. If you haven't seen it, you should. You really should. Those of you who have know, of course, about this, a bit of bending the facts here and there. Let me mention some few examples. In the beginning of the film, John is given a mouth organ. Do you call it that? Or harmonica, or, you know, by his Uncle George. Well, he got that gift, but that was much earlier on. He got it when he was 10 years old, and at this point he's a young man. He's definitely more than 10 years old. Shortly after Uncle George dies, that's true, but in the film they made it like, you know, that very kind man who was not as strict as his wife, you know, that was Mimi, that he loses him and is in a existential vacuum, and that may make him look for his mother. That's not true. he was in contact with Julia when Uncle George dies. So no, that's not how it was. Another example, well, that you all know that famous story about John Lennon smashing the washboard into the head of Pete Shotton. They have used that in the film, but at a wrong occasion. They have made it like it's a birthday party. Julia is having for John, and it's there, it happened. And if any of you haven't seen the film, you might sit now and think, well, that's blasphemy. You can't do that. You can't fuck about with such an important incident. Because those of you who say that, of course, you know it was not at that occasion it happened. But again, I tell you, when you see the film, you really don't care. It doesn't matter. Well, and a last thing I will mention, well, of course, the most important of all the incidents, John meeting Paul. There are several eyewitnesses to the occasion, and they all agreed that Paul and John didn't shake hands. They do that in the film, but it doesn't matter. I showed you this book, The Day John Met Paul. The way he tells the story, he says they didn't shake hands, but they were both taken by the hand by fate. And you know that's how it is. It is such a big and important thing. It is the moment. But they didn't know that back then. They didn't know they were writing history. They didn't know I am standing here and this is the moment. And the story of the history of music is filled with anecdotes of people who had to travel very, very far to find like-minded people. Chopin came from Poland and traveled all the way to France, Paris, and there are all sorts of stories. And here, those two, the biggest songwriters in the history of pop and rock, growing up in the same city, and now they are meeting each other. This is the moment. But the way they does it in the film, you know, on a more metaphorical level, it covers that, telling the same story, because it's very casual. It's like, okay, I'm John, yeah, I'm Paul, you know, and it's so casual. It's just two teenagers saying hi to you. Well, and a really short handshake, and that's what makes it so great. Because you are sitting there watching the movie and you know this is the moment, and you are saying, oh, that's so great, oh yeah. And they didn't know. So they are so casual and, I don't care about it, you know. And that's what makes it so great. And it is really well done, even though it's not how it exactly was. And that this handshake is incorrect. It doesn't matter. On a more symbolic, metaphorical level, it tells the same story as when Jim O'Donnell says they didn't shake hands, but they were both taken by the hand by faith. You know, it's this feeling of meant to be, you know, and oh, it's so great. And you know, there are it's really it really kind of brings back the magic, making the magic, and as a viewer to the movie, you become a part of the magic. You know that magic. You in the an anthology series, you remember that scene. Is it in spite of all the dangers they are playing here, there, or another one of those early recordings? I'm not sure, but while that music is playing, there is this scene you are going down the stairs into a room in a cellar, and there stands this tape recorder, and the tape runs out and going the last snippet of the tape going there. You know that I remember the first time I saw it, and I was oh, because there is this, you know, the music is played with a lot of reverb, echo, or something that makes you feel like it's far away, and you're going down these stairs, and it's like you are diving into history, and you are going deeper, and there you find it, that tape recorder. Here it is. Here you got the exhibit, the proof, or whatever you might call it, and it's so great. But sorry, I kind of lost my way and got far out here. So let me cut it here and go further about material of sources to the subject. One thing I will say, there is a quite good video here on YouTube where a guy is reviewing Nowhere Boy and goes a little bit more into detail with that film. You know, I mentioned a few details about it, but he goes a bit more into detail. It's a whole video about that film, more or less. I think he is talking about several films, but he's doing a great job on Nowhere Boy. One thing that struck me about that video was that he said that in spite of all the dangers, didn't make much of an impact on him when he first saw it saw or heard it on the anthology, and I was, what? I think, what? You know, from the first time I heard it, I was so, wow. And it was also this, you know, surprising thing about it, that for so many years I have thought, well, the earliest thing there is was this session with Tony Sheridan in '61. And that's it. That's how far as you can go back. And there is this recording. There are two recordings. There are without Tony Sheridan. There are Inchy Sweet and Cry for a Shadow. Cry for a Shadow, a composition by John Lennon and George Harrison. So it's kind of well, their own material. Inchy Sweet is not. It's an old jazz standard, actually. I think it's back from the 20s, actually, the original version. But, you know, it's John Lennon singing and sort of, so it's like, okay. And most of those compilations with the Sheridan sessions begins with Inchy Sweet. That's the opening track. So it's sort of, okay, it all began with Ain't She Sweet, and then slowly things started to change, and the acid were coming in, and things got very experimental, and well, and and at the other side, you got This Is the End, and there you got it, a complete work from A to Z, a travel through about everything in music. It's like all has been said. Well, I thought that. I thought that for many, many years. But suddenly there was this recording from several years before with this really, really young John, Paul, and George singing together. And yes, I know it's primitive and inferior and all that, but I think it's a good tune. And I actually think at this very, very early point, it shows something about Beatles and Beatles making music. You know, there is this little part, you know, I showed you this Quarrymen CDs. They have a version of In Spite of All the Dangers without the and you know, no, it all falls to pieces. This little snip of choir is so essential to that tune, and it's what really does the job. And you know, you got something there that can be compared to later on. You know, there are so many Beatles songs where they are just a little thing, and that just sort of, well, it may be a good song, and it could be a good song without it, but it makes it so much better. And I I know all of you who are Beatles fans, you can mention so many examples of it, so I won't begin here to say a lot about that, because you all know it. You all heard all these fantastic songs, and there are all these fine little details that making it so much better, and making it so much more than just a good song. And you know, there you may have seen that live recording of Paul McCartney. I actually think it's in the Cavern Club or something. You know, it's a kind of little and thing, and for just a little crowd. And he's playing In Spite of All the Dangers, and is telling the crowd to sing that bit, that and they kind of does it there. Of course, Paul McCartney knows how his own song should be played, so he knows how important that is. But those old Quarrymen, they totally missed the point, and playing a version of In Spite of All the Dangers without that and it all falls to pieces. It's like, well, let me come up with just one example. It's actually from after the Beatles, from the solo careers. Imagine, you know, that piano intro. Bum, 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 bum. You could play just those chords, and it would work. It could be the intro to a song. But it's that little thing, ba 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 bum. Is that what make it kind of give it its character, its definitive character? if you were just playing the chords, it was like it could be Imagine, or it could be maybe another song. But that da ba da bam, that's the characteristic, and that was making it Imagine. And at the same time, it's something that makes a great song even better. And the same thing with In Spite of All the Danger and that. And I've really given it and yes, and what's the thing more? Well, you can find some examples of Skiffle recordings with there are some harmonics and voices and such things, but it was not that common. And you know, that sort of thing with contrasting voices, one singing that, and there was this cold response thing. Well, there are some examples, but it's very few. The common thing was that you had a lead singer singing the verse, and then everybody joined in at the chorus. And that was it. That making a contrasting voice, and you know, it's a kind of trademark for a lot of the things Beatles did later on. Take for No One with that oboe coming in and playing this little melody of its own, and you know, that sort of things. And one thing I want to say about that is there has been said so much about when the Beatles went into their experimental period. But let me tell you, they were experimental right from the beginning, and was always trying out ideas and doing kind of everything they could sort of, and said, well, let's try this, let's try that, and we might do this a little different. And you know, they were not experimental in the psychedelic sense. They were not making Sgt. Pepper back in the 50s. Of course they were not. But they were experimental in the sense that they were all the time trying out new ideas. And you know, from the anthology, just those few examples they use there kind of show it. And also kind of how much fun they had with it. You know, there is this song, what's the title? Oh, it's gone now. This parody of the Ink Spots, where they got that talking part with, my darling, when you burned the toast the other day. And it's so funny, you know. If any of you don't know the Ink Spots, but have heard that and thought, oh, that's kind of funny, well, listen to some Ink Spots and then go back and listen to that, and you will find it 10 times more funny, because it's such a good parody. They really nailed it. They got the style of the Ink Spots so perfect. Oh, it irritates me. I can't recall the title of the song. But you know, all those things were trademarks for Beatles later on, trying out new ideas, going into areas of all kinds of music and having fun with it. there was always this kind of jolly and excited. Oh, it's funny to me to play music, and we are having a good time. Well, at least until some point. Then they were not having a good time anymore. Some say that new Get Back documentaries kind of say something else and tells you, oh, that is not the fact. And you know, if you've seen it, you know that, okay, it was not like you have heard about, that they hated each other and couldn't be in the same room, and it was so awful. Well, obviously it was not like that, but in some points it doesn't change the story. You know, the Beatles actually did break up, no matter for what reasons. It was not like, okay. Then they made 15 albums more through the 70s and 80s. They didn't. Well, at least not together. So they break up, no matter the reasons. And you know, for whatever any reasons, the last albums is having really got that, you know, cheerful and exciting sound. And I think it's most obvious on the White Album and Let It Be. Abbey Road, there is a bit of it, but not quite like it used to be. It's more like they are now they are showing how far they had come, and they are kind of growing up as musicians. So they're making this very, what do you call it, mature adult album, and sounding so professional, and they really come a long way back from In Spite of All the Dangers. Oh, sorry, I lost my way again, and blah, 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 sorry. The only thing I was trying to say is that for such a long time I have thought, okay, there's Ain't She Sweet from 61, and that's how far back as you can go. And suddenly I discovered, well, you can go some years further back, and there actually is a lot of material, much more than is included in the anthology. Some of it can be a little difficult to find, but it's possible you can find it. One particular song you won't find anywhere. And to be honest, I'm not sure if this is actually true or it's a legend. But the story goes that first time Beatles was in Hamburg. So that was actually before the Sheridan sessions. We are in 1960 here. They were Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. You know, Ringo was in Rory Storm and the Hurricanes at that point. Rory Storm and the Hurricanes were touring in Hamburg at the same time. And the story goes that the later lineup of the Beatles, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and perhaps one more guy from Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, together actually recorded a song. It is said that the song was Gershwin's Summertime. They were recording that song. That recording is nowhere to be found, but the story goes that there exists one copy of a printed record somewhere in the world. Maybe in Paul McCartney's private collection or something. It has never been released. And I mean, wow, to hear that. Ringo as the drummer in 1960. Well, forget about that Getting Back documentary and almost everything else. It to hear that, and just try to imagine how would they play Summertime. Well, my guess is that they are leaning up at Gene Vincent's version. That was kind of the first more rock and roll oriented version of the song. You know, it used to be a jazz standard. It's by Gershwin. It's from Porgy and Bess, and all kinds of jazz musicians has played the song. Well, so it is. If you don't know, I actually met people who thought it was written by Janis Joplin because of her very famous version with that little classic theme. Da ba ba bam ba 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 bam. Well, it's much older and had been played by jazz musicians. Well, I guess since Gershwin made Porgy and Bess. It ain't necessarily so. That is also from Porgy and Bess. The first kind of rock version, that was by Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, and many later rock-oriented versions is kind of inspired by that. There is a version by Jerry and the Pacemakers of it, and well, it's obvious they have heard the version by Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, but they are not playing it exactly like that. They are playing it a bit slower than Gene Vincent does. But imagine that. Well, you're gonna look and search for a long time and you won't find it. I'm sorry to tell you. I would give almost anything to hear that recording just one time. I would give almost anything for that, but I don't think there's much of a change of it. It's one of those hidden secrets, just like later on with McCartney's Carnival in Light or something, that you are probably never going to hear, unfortunately. But what can you find? Well, if you want to know exactly and complete what can be found, you gotta have this book, Way Beyond Compare, The Beatles Record Legacy, Volume 1, from 57 to 65. In this book, it's not such a storytelling narrative, it's pure facts all the way. And you can find every recording made and also some information about where to get. I'm afraid I promised you too much. No. This recording was released, and so on. So if you really want to know what exists and where to get it, this is the one. You must have this. And if you want a kind of a little different approach to John Lennon, and especially his younger years, there is this book written by his sister, or half-sister it is, They didn't have the same father, but Julia was the mother to both of them, and she's also called Julia Baird. That must be a name she had married to, I guess. There's a picture of her behind. You can see there are some resemblance with John, and she tells about that. She met him when he was a child, but don't think that everything here is stone hard facts. It is not. One thing that is a bit embarrassing, I would say, is that she tells this story about John being born while there was a bomb attack of German aeroplanes. There wasn't. That's a myth. I know it's a really good story, and I love the story, but it's not true. He was not. There were actually an interval of several days where there were not any bomb attacks on Liverpool. Speaking of which, all those stories that came around and people have believed and say, oh, it's such a good story. Yes, but it's not true. There is this book, quite funny, called The Walrus Was Ringo. And you can see here, 101 Beatles myths debunked. They are going all through those legends that you thought that's how it was. Well, it was not exactly how it was. And they do a quite good job on that and telling you, well, so you can find out what is facts and what is myth. About that bomb story, I am the lucky owner of an independent source because it's not related to Beatles in any way. It's related to the Second World War. It's on Danish, and I don't think you can find it on other languages, so it may not be that relevant. It's called Krigens dagbog, eller 2. verdenskrigs dagbog. That means the diary of the Second World War. It's 3 big volumes about everything that happened during the Second World War, and there are the exact dates for anything that happened. And no, there you got an independent source, and no, there was not a bomb attack that day. Sorry, I know it's a good story, but no. I mentioned earlier about the Cavern originally being a jazz club, and we talked a little about John's disliking jazz, but actually around the Cavern environment, Beatles met many of those guys. Chris Barber played at the Cavern, and many of the other guys. I don't know about Humphrey Lyttelton, I'm not sure, but many of those orchestras, and it was not like it was the enemy or something. They became more or less friendly with many of them. Oh, I gotta say, I will wait with that story, but there also was a traditional jazz orchestra in Liverpool called the Mississippi Jazz Band, and you can find this compilation with them. and we have talked about a little of what inspired Beatles, and I told the story about Bad Penny Blues and Lady Madonna. There is this compilation called Beatles Beginnings. There are no exact recordings of Beatles. It's all about things that inspired them, things they had been listened to and have inspired them. And I promised you before that I would say something more about singers from Liverpool, and because Liverpool was not that big a thing before the Beatles. Well, it was famous for football, and the harbour had been so kind of, oh, I don't know the English word for that, but you know, ships coming from America and all that. So for trading and so all sorts of things, but after the Second World War, it wasn't as important as it has been before about all that, about trading and so. So what was left? Football, and that was about it, and that was all Liverpool was famous for. So it was not like there were a lot of artists coming from Liverpool. So, you know, that thing about Billy Fury being from Liverpool, it is actually something, and that's why I think it could be true, that story about John Lennon asking for his autograph. Because you must remember, John Lennon was not the famous John Lennon yet. He was just a young kid from Liverpool, and there was a guy coming from the same city. It was kind of one of ours, you know, and he has become famous, and wow, it's like it's one of our own, you know that, and so I think it might very well might be true, but actually there was a singer before Billy Fury that got national attention and was quite famous in most of Britain, but it was in a kind of different style of music. Is this guy Michael Holiday, a singer from the 50s, and not very rock and roll orientated. It's more like family entertainment. It's, you know, sort of the puppy in the window kind of music. I mentioned earlier Joe Brown, that has written the foreword to that same Skiffle book, where there also is a foreword by George Harrison. And actually, Joe Brown and George Harrison was quite good friends. And the Beatles, in their early days, actually, he got known and famous a little bit before, and they actually played some of his tunes. There is the very best of Joe Brown, if you want to go into that. The second song on this, A Picture of You, there is a very early live recording of the Beatles, where they actually are playing Picture of You with George Harrison singing it. But here he is. The Sounds of Fury. Yeah. Well, at least he looks good. Well, he wasn't that bad a singer. He was actually quite good, you know, for an English rock and roll act. You know, most early English rock and roll was really bad. You know, about the first thing that came along was Tommy Steele. I mean, compare Tommy Steele to something like Little Ray Richard. I mean, that power of Little Ray Richard, and his voice, and the way he makes it all move, and that drive, and and I know some have outridden Bill Haley as being just some kind of cozy uncle, but he could make it move. There's a really solid drive in that music. Listen to Rock Around the Clock or another of those, and they really make it move. And Tommy Steele, it's so bad compared to that. There's none of that magic and excitement. It's just a guy with a thin voice trying to play rock and roll. I wouldn't even say it is rock and roll. It's someone trying to play rock and roll. And at the same time, at Tommy Steele, lesser known, but it was at the same time, there was a guy called Tony Crumpy, who was obviously inspired by Bill Haley, and they made a song that was obviously built on Rock Around the Clock. And I guess he's not singing anything else than gonna rock all through the song. It starts, gonna rock, gonna rock, gonna rock, 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 rock. And then it starts to move, and there's none of the magic. You can hear it's inspired by Bill Haley, and it's quite obvious, but it's not on the same level. Not at all. As you all probably all know, later came along Cliff Richard. The first things he did was actually quite good. Then he kind of moved into a softer area and making all those things, Living Doll and Traveling Light and Lessons in Love, but no matter how hard you would go on Cliff, there was something there. There was a style of its own with Hank Marvin's guitar playing and all that. He found his own way. But his first hit, Move It, both John and Paul had mentioned it in several interviews, and the story goes that they were very excited by that guitar intro. Come on, pretty baby, let's move it and groove it. Well, if you want to be fair, it is the first original rock and roll classic from a British act. It really is. But that was not what I was going to tell you. There were this guitar intro. They were very excited about that, but couldn't figure out how to play it. And the story goes that Paul saw Cliff and the Shadows playing on TV, and Hank Marvin, and there was a close-up with the camera on Hank Marvin's hands while he was doing this intro, and Paul said, "Oh, that's how we do it." And he put his guitar on his back and down on his bike and cycled down there to Menlo and shouting up at John's window, I got it! And that's how the story goes. Well, it may be a myth, but if you want to be fair, that is the first of 3 trademarks of British rock and roll. In 1958, Cliff and Move It. Then in 1960, Johnny Kidd and the Pirates with Shakin' All Over. And then, of course, as you all know, in 1963, I Saw Her Standing There with the Beatles. That is the first 3 really big trademarks and cornerstones of British rock. That really matters. Oh, I would really like to say a lot about Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. They deserve a much bigger place in the history of rock than they have got. They are sort of there between Cliff and Beatles, and that's not, from a historical point of view and being a knowledge and all that, it's not the best place to be. I may make a whole video about them, but to put it short, I will say, Shakin' All Over was a big hit, and they had a few smaller hits, but they were not a band with many hits, but they were very popular in the club circle. And many of those who would become famous later on were big fans and followers. And I'm talking about like guys like Jimmy Page, Pete Townshend, and a lot of other other guys there were really followers of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. I could say so much more about it. Well, I leave it for another time. Not to. So this video would not be too long. But one more thing I got to say, and I think it's a bit important, is that, as I told you, like things like Mersey, Zippy Jazz Band, or this guy Michael Holiday, well, it may be connected to Liverpool, but stylistic, it was a complete different thing. And it was not that British invasion sound at all. If you really want to hear British invasion before British invasion, the band to listen to is Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. They were really the one that made an exact British sound. Yeah, it was rock and roll, but it was not just, copying the American artist. They really find a sound and a style of their own. And well, they were not from Liverpool, but it is kind of the forerunner of the Beatles. And it was a really great band. And I tell you, Johnny Kidd, or Freddie Heath was his real name. Johnny Kidd was a stage name. He is such a great singer. Fantastic voice. Very powerful and very expressive and really good. But what about those acts that actually are from Liverpool? Well, I will show you something here. Here's a series of 3 CDs. The Unhearded, Mercy Beats, and there are, this is very early and very rare recordings about with a lot of all those Liverpool groups, and there are some of the famous among them, like Swinging Blue Jeans and Jerry and the Pacemakers, and so you can hear some very early tracks with them, and you can really sort of hear, oh yeah, you can hear this, and if they are not my only grudge against it, I think it's really great stuff. My only issue is that it's not chronological, but you could put them into your computer and set them in chronological order, or you could record it to tape. You can make it chronological in some way or another, And if you listen to it in chronological order, you can really hear that specific sound come into being, and how those different bands added to it. And of course, that I talked a bit about that in the first video, have their own twist of things. So it's not like they were all playing exactly the same kind of music and all sounding alike. They were not. But there are some overall general tendencies, and you can hear that here. There is so much I could go into here and say a lot about, but this video is getting much too long. One thing I should mention, I think, is that later on in the 60s, Pete Best had a band called the Pete Best Combo. So if you want to kind of follow that sideline of the story, it's actually possible. I probably make a whole video about Pete Best and his drumming at some point. There's a lot of things I want to say about that, and the reasons why he was sacked, and this discussion of was he a bad drummer or was he not. And I think there are really many things that could be said about that. And I can reveal that now. I also think there could have been several reasons for his sacking. It's like people always saying, oh, there's one reason and only one reason. Who say there can't be several reasons? And I think there is. And, you know, some of them may be more important than others. But you all know, and I guess you all experience that if you are getting tired of someone, things that aren't that important, they start to get at you and irritates and frustrates you. Small things that doesn't really matter that much, but it kind of add up, and those small things are kind of boosting the main reasons. And I think there can be said a lot about that. I won't do it now, no matter I'm very tempted to, but I won't. At some point I will make a VV video all about Pete Best and about that, and dig deep into that subject. So what should I show you more? I don't think I will show you more from this box. I think I should show you something from, well, another one of my many boxes. You can take a view here, see, well, I got quite a lot of boxes. That's my way of keeping my collection in sort of order and system, and being able to relatively quickly find something I am looking for. If it just was whoops, all there, just standing, I don't think I would be able to find anything at all. So I would take another box here and show you something from. One book here is The True Beginnings, The Beatles, by Rogue Best with Pete and Rory Best. Yes, Pete Best is in over here, and it's kind of tribute to their mother, Mona Best. She seems to have been a wonderful woman. if you are really anti Pete Best, you may have an issue with that they praising her as the mother of Mercy Beat. But one thing that is a fact is that she made this club called the Cash Bar, and in her house, so the youngsters could come and play their music. Well, not many parents did that back then, and it seems she have been a very supporting mother to Pete Best. So the issues later on, well, I tell you, she was such a supporting mother that if you messed with Pete, you messed with Mona, or Mo, as everyone called her. I guess that could go for short for both Mona and Mother. So she was just Mo. And there are some pictures of her in this book, and it seems she was a very beautiful woman. And according to this book, very sweet and nice too, maybe a bit dominating. And the sacking of Pete Best was not the first clash that happened. There is a previous story several years before Pete Best became the drummer. At that time, there was a guy in Quarrymen / Beatles called Ken Brown. They were playing at the Cash Bar. Ken Brown was really sick and ill. He almost couldn't stand on his feet, but he showed up to the job. And Mona said, "Oh, you poor boy, sit down here and have a nice cup of tea, and I take care of you. And in that condition, you shall not play." But it's so heroic that you showed up and you can hardly stand on your feet, so you got the wages for. And John, Paul, and George got furious. Said, "What? Paying him? He didn't play." So, and you know, up to there, it was before the cabin became their home base. So the Cash Bar at that time was actually kind of their home base. But they quit it and didn't play at the Cash Bar for a long time after that. They didn't want anyone to interfere with them and decide who's to be paid and not to be paid. That was their decision, and they were really furious about it. So that was the first clash. Later on, when Pete entered in the band, actually for a while she was kind of the manager or something close to that. But what is for sure here, and what there's no doubt about, is they must have met Pete much earlier, long before he became the drummer in the band. Maybe not talked with him, maybe not tried to play with him, but they must have met him. That's for sure. You know, another guy that played a part in the Beatles story and was a member for a time, you know, of course, that was Stuart Sutcliffe. There is this book, The Beatles Shadow, Stuart Sutcliffe. It's written by Pauline Sutcliffe. That's his sister, and of course, being his sister, she knew him quite well, and she met the other guys. So it's kind of an inside story. Well, also with a bit of speculation. There is also, no, that's not true. Sorry, forget about that. But well, a little more about Pete Best, and then I leave it there and leave the rest for another video. There are this book by Spencer Lye called "Drum Out: The Sacking of Pete Best," and there's Pete Best's own book. But as some have said, I think it's in that book I showed you by 101 Myths Bonked, The Walrus was Ringo. That book, I think it's there. They have what I think is a quite fine remark saying, well, the one who gets kicked out usually do not know what has been said behind his back. I guess that's true. And that's a fine remark to make. So it's like Pete was the one left with all the questions. He's not the one that knows the answers. He's the one who's got the questions and saying, why? What did I do wrong? And why is this happening? So he's the one with the questions, not the one with the answers. Oh yeah, well, I mentioned Stuart Sutcliffe. Here's a book, Stuart Sutcliffe, a retrospective, tells a lot about him, and there are, you can see many of his pictures in there, and well, if you said Stuart Sutcliffe, you had to say Astrid Kirchner, and there is also this book, Astrid Kirchner, a retrospective. Of course, it's in the same series as you can guess with that title, and so, but that's a lot of important stuff. And you know, then came along Mr. Epstein. Brian Epstein, of course, there is his own book here. Well, you have to see it on the side. A cellar full of noise. I guess you all have heard the story of what John Lennon suggested for a title. We won't go into that. There is this one by Ray Coleman, Brian Epstein, the man who made the Beatles. And finally, there's this one by Deborah Geller. You know, it was his secretary, the Brian Best story. Yeah. That's about the books I will mention just now. Let's look at some music. Just before that, I was talking about Michael Holiday and Billy Fury. One thing I think is important to mention is that, you know, one of the trademarks of the early Beatles, well, the early Beatles after the breakthrough and they became popular, was that northern accent dialect up there in the area of Liverpool and Manchester, this thing called scouse, that is quite different from BBC English. It's not like hearing the guy who reads the news in the BBC radio. It's another kind of English, this thing called scouse, and that they had that dialect, accent, whatever you might call it, that added something to their sound. I really think that's a very important subject that there haven't been said that much about, that they were actually pronouncing the words in a way that was a part of the sound they had. And you know, with Michael Holiday and Billy Fury, there's not a thing about that. They may be from Liverpool, but they could just as well have been from Oxford. That was just a little short one I wanted to throw in. Of course, I guess you all know this box set and got it. George Martin, 50 years of recording. And of course there are some Beatles on it, but a lot of other things, both from before and after. So according to the subject we are talking about here, it's mostly the things from before that we should look at. And you probably all have heard about that parlophone was not that big thing before the Beatles, and they were making such as comedy records and such things, but there are some interesting things in here, and if you look at it from the point of view of how to produce music, I actually think there are some things here that is quite remarkable. There is this recording of a song called Robin Hood from I guess it was from a TV series, and it was the theme song. Dick James is the name of the singer. It's not that interesting a song, but from a producing point of view, there is a really interesting thing. There is a children's choir on that record, and they are mixed so great. You know that this lead singer, Dick, what was his name? Dick something. Never mind. Is just slightly louder than the choir. They are blending quite good, but he sticks out as the lead voice with the choir just a little bit behind. Not behind rhythmically, but dynamically. And it's really well blended, and it's really good making this lead singer just a little bit louder so he sticks out. And remember when it was done, it was somewhere back in the late 50s. For its time, it's a really good production, and that is of course the thing you should look for and listen after when you hear this. It's not about, well, is this song great or is it bad or what is it? It doesn't matter. And of course there are a lot of all those. Well, I'm talking too much, and you probably all know that box set. If you don't, it's really a must-have. And to go with that, some good reading is of course George Martin's book, All You Need Is Ears, about his career and as a music producer. And of course there's a lot about the Beatles, but it's not entirely about the Beatles. That this is George Martin's own story and about a lot of the different things he produced through the years. Will I go into any of that? No, I don't think I would do that now. The sessions with Tony Sheridan have been released many times on different records. I will show you a few of them. There is this box set and oh yeah, you think it's a lot of things. No, it's not. What fills up the most of it is this book, and then there's just one CD, and that's all. And what's on there is the same thing that you can find elsewhere. It's an interesting book that comes with it, but if you just want the music, it's not the one you should go for. This is actually the same album, just with a little bit different cover, but it's the same tracks on there. And there are Ain't She Sweet and Cry for a Shadow and My Bonnie and all those, you know. So, yes, as I said, they're variations of the same album. Here's a extended version. It's a double album, but I honestly don't think there are more Beatles material. I just think it's Tony Sheridan with other backing groups. So it's not that. If you are interested in Tony Sheridan and what did he do and what did he record it after his recording with the Beatles and that sort of things, well, there are some. Well, that was the other box I had there. There were also some things with Tony Sheridan from later on. Some might be interested in going into that, and there are possibilities on both CDs and vinyl. And then, of course, there's the Decca session a bit later on, New Year's Day, 1962. It has been released many, many times. So here's a few of them. And it's more or less the same thing on them there. There might be, a few, a song, a song missing on one that is on another. What's really sad is that on most of them, actually the three, what you might say is actually the most interesting recordings, because that is original material. Hello Little Girl, Like Dreamers Do, and what is it called? Each time I look into your eyes, therein lies. Love of the Lost, yeah. Three early Lennon McCartney originals are not on most of them. It's all the covers that are there. Doesn't make much sense, because of course original material, that's what is really interesting. It's hard to find on vinyl, actually. It is on quite a few CDs. What do we have here? This is also, this CD, it's also with the Sheridan sessions. What is this? Oh, it's something completely else. There's not much to do with that. What about this one? No, this is more or less the live at Star Club Hamburg. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, there are also the Decca session on this box set, but yeah, it's kind of a compilation of live at Star Club Hamburg and the Decca session. Oh, yeah. Well, this is a funny one, but I won't say so much about that, but it's kind of funny. Bam. Is that all I can? Well, oh, here's one, really one that matters. Oh, was I wrong? Isn't it that? Oh, it is. This one. Well, it's a bent called Not For Sale, but it is. If you can find it anywhere, it's a bit of a mix, because there are also some later recordings, and they're going all up to things like I Me Mine and A Day in the Life and Paperback Writer in alternative versions. So, but there are some really early stuff here, and one thing that is really interesting is an instrumental called Cats Walk. I told you earlier that Beatles was always experimental. Well, not in the psychedelic sense, but they were trying out ideas all the time, right from the very first beginning, and trying out all sorts of ideas and doing all sorts of things. And this catwalk, it has a very unusual chord progression. You know, most of the songs played back then, the for following the 12-bar blues round. This is a very unusual chord progression it got, uh, and the story gets better. Well, I told you that there in the cabin area, the young Beatles actually met many of those revival jazz people, and later on that catwalk, it was way up. I don't recall exactly what year, but it was at least in the mid 60s, or perhaps even later in the late 60s. It was recorded by Chris Barber's orchestra, but the title was changed to Cat's Call, and the story gets even better. That recording by Chris Barber of Cat's Walk or Cat's Call was produced by Paul McCartney. So there you got it. That track is also on some CDs, but this is the only one I have been able to find where it's on vinyl. There may be other compilation where you can find it. I haven't been able to find it elsewhere. Is there more in this box I want to say something about? No, there is not. We will. Oh well, there is something here, a bit different, but that's some DVDs about the early days. The Beatles and the Hamburg Sound. Pete Best of the Beatles. Stuart Sutcliffe, The Lost Beatle. The Beatles Distinction, Hamburg. Documentaries on of different quality, but most of them actually quite informative, and a lot of interesting facts you can pick up from those. And maybe for those of you who are not so much into reading books and that is not your thing, this might be the way that you can, maybe not as much in depth, but to some extent you can get the facts from here. So, well, this video has been running for much too long, so I think I'll stop here. And maybe later on, as I continue the story and we move a little forward, I can once in a while mention some material and saying, okay, you want to know some more about this, you want to hear how that sounded and all that, and I will name some sources. But about the really early days, I think I had come around most of the best material there is, both for information and for listening to the music. So you don't have to put up with me and be tortured by my lousy English for God knows how many videos. You can dig into the things yourself and found out about all the things. But one thing I'm gonna tell you It's gonna take some time. It's not just okay, yeah. I spent a week in bed reading books, and then I spent the next week at my stereo and listening to the music, and then I'm an expert of the early Beatles. Sorry, it actually takes a bit of hard work, and it takes some time to get into those things. So if you want the shortcut, and having, well, not every kind of information you can get from this material, I can't go into all of it, but at least the headlines and the highlights, and have that shortcut, have that from a crazy fellow from Denmark that had spent a lot of time digging into those things. Well, I'm sorry, you have to put up with my lousy English, and maybe frustrated a lot about how I pronounce some words, and sometimes stopping and searching for a word and don't know how to express things. I wish I could do it better, but I can't. But after this video, you got the opportunity to dig into things yourself, and then you don't have to put up with me. But I just say it could be a shortcut, because if you really want to get into it, it is many hours of reading, looking at videos, listening to music, and doing it over and over again, and really getting into the stuff. But it's good to have some different possibilities, and you can do one thing and you can do another thing, and there are many possibilities. And isn't that what was the kind of the message surrounding the Beatles music? I mean, they were doing so many different things, and all that experimentation and all that. Wasn't it like saying, oh, there are so many possibilities, there are so many things you can do. Nothing you can do that can't be done, nothing you can sing that can't be sung. There, you got it. I mean, and I showed you some material. I expect you got the anthology, the music on either CDs or vinyl, and the DVDs, or if you are that old-fashioned, videotapes with where you see the story. At least you gotta have. You need to. That's a must. Episode 1 with that, going down to the cellar scene I told you about, and you are hearing In Spite of All the Dangers, and it's so fantastic. It's pure magic, and it's really, yeah, I know it wasn't as professional, and from a technical level, from a technical point of view, it's not very good, but it's good in another sense, and it's so much the real thing. That's how it was. That's how it all began. It's the real thing. It's straight from the heart, and it's schoolboys having fun, and so genuine, so honest. It's really the real deal, and there really is this excitement and magic, and it's so fantastic. So forget about the technical level and all that stuff. You know how it went with all that thing, and ended kind of sad. You know that. You all know the story. And I mean, all through the day, I be mine, I be mine, I be mine. Who cares for that suicide shit? This is magic. This is pure fucking magic. Sorry, that's a personal point of view, and you may disagree, and I know many of you will do that, but forgive me, that's just my point of view.